I never imagined that a snowstorm in Boulder, Colorado would lead to the most satisfying act of petty revenge I'd ever commit. But that's exactly what happened 3 days after the biggest blizzard of 2025 dumped 2 feet of heavy, wet snow on our neighborhood. My name is Samuel Sterling, and I'd lived in the Pleasant Valley Estates for about 6 months. When I bought my house on Maple Ridge Court, the realtor mentioned the HOA but glossed over the details with that practiced smile real estate agents perfect over years of hiding inconvenient truths. I should have paid more attention. I should have read every line of those HOA bylaws. But I was 32, recently promoted at my software engineering job, and just excited to finally own my first house. The neighborhood looked perfect when I moved in during the summer. Manicured lawns, uniform mailboxes, and houses painted in approved color palettes that ranged from beige to slightly darker beige. The HOA president was a woman named Patricia Patterson, a 53-year-old former real estate agent who treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. She had that distinctive haircut, you know the one, where it's short in the back and longer in the front. She drove a white Lexus SUV and always wore designer athletic, where even though I'd never seen her exercise, everything was fine until winter hit. The first snow in November was light, maybe 3 inches, and I shoveled my driveway without issue. But then February arrived with a vengeance. The meteorologists had been warning about a major system moving in from the Pacific Northwest, and they weren't exaggerating. It started snowing on a Tuesday evening, and by Wednesday morning, my entire property was buried. I work from home most days, which Patricia seemed to view as suspicious, as if having a flexible schedule meant I was unemployed and bringing down property values. That Wednesday, I spent the morning on video calls, watching the snow pile up outside my window. By noon, I bundled up and went outside to assess the situation. My driveway was completely covered, my car looked like an igloo, and my roof, a fairly steep pitched roof that had seemed like such a good idea when I bought the place, was sagging under what had to be thousands of pounds of snow. I'm not particularly handy, but I'm also not an idiot. That much weight could cause serious structural damage. I started with the driveway, spending 2 hours clearing a path to the street. My back was screaming by the time I finished, and my fingers were numb despite my gloves. I looked up at my roof and knew I needed help. I called 3 different snow removal companies, but they were all booked solid for at least 3 days. Everyone was dealing with the same problem. That's when Patricia showed up. She pulled into my driveway in her Lexus, window rolling down with that automatic smoothness that expensive cars have. "Samuel," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone of false friendliness that meant trouble. "I wanted to remind you about the HOA bylaws regarding snow removal." I walked over to her car, leaning on my shovel. "Yeah, I'm working on it. Just cleared the driveway." "I'm specifically talking about the roof," she said, pulling out her phone and scrolling through what I assumed was the HOA handbook. Section 12, Paragraph 4 states that homeowners must remove snow from their roofs within 48 hours of a snowfall ending. I looked up at the sky. Snow was still falling, lighter now but definitely still falling. "It hasn't stopped yet. The forecast says it'll stop by 6 this evening," Patricia said, "which means you'll need to have it cleared by 6 p.m. Friday. I'm just giving you advance notice to prevent any violations." "Patricia, every snow removal company in Boulder is backed up for days. I've already called." She gave me that smile, the one that never reached her eyes. "That's unfortunate, but the bylaws are the bylaws. They exist to maintain property values and safety standards. If snow causes damage to your home due to negligence, it affects the entire neighborhood." "I'm not being negligent," I said, feeling my temper starting to rise. "I'm being realistic. It's still snowing and there's 2 feet of it out here." 48 hours, Samuel. "I'd hate to have to issue a fine." She rolled up her window and backed out of my driveway, leaving me standing there in disbelief. I spent the rest of Wednesday and all of Thursday trying to find someone, anyone, who could help with my roof. I even considered doing it myself, but one look at the steep pitch and icy conditions made me reconsider. I'm reasonably fit, but I'm not Spider-Man. The risk of falling and breaking my neck seemed worse than dealing with Patricia. Friday morning arrived, and the snow had finally stopped around 8 p.m. Thursday, earlier than forecasted. I was on my roof by 7 a.m., having borrowed a roof rake from my neighbor, an older guy named Tom who actually sympathized with my situation. Patricia's been a nightmare since she got elected HOA president 2 years ago, Tom told me while handing over the rake. She fined me last year because my fence was half an inch taller than the allowed 6 feet. Half an inch. I had to get 3 separate measurements from different contractors to prove her wrong. I thanked him and got to work. The roof rake was essentially a long pole with a blade attachment, designed to let you pull snow off the roof from ground level. It worked great for the edges, but the peak of my roof was too high to reach effectively. I spent hours pulling down what I could, creating massive piles of snow in my yard. By noon, I'd cleared maybe 60% of the roof. The rest would require actually getting up there with a shovel, which seemed increasingly necessary as I watched my gutters strain under the weight. I set up my extension ladder, made sure it was secure, and carefully climbed up. The view from my roof was actually pretty impressive. I could see most of the neighborhood, including the HOA community center about 3 blocks away. It was a nice building, paid for by our monthly dues, complete with a meeting room, a small gym, and a parking lot that Patricia and the board members treated as their personal reserved spaces. I was carefully pushing snow off the peak when I heard a car door slam. I looked down to see Patricia standing in my driveway again, this time with another woman I recognized as Linda Morrison, the HOA secretary. Linda was in her late 40s, always wearing too much makeup and seemed to exist solely to agree with everything Patricia said. "Samuel," Patricia called up. "It's 12:30 p.m. You have 5.5 hours left." "I'm aware," I shouted back, not stopping my work. "We're just doing a preliminary inspection to document the current state," Linda said, holding up her phone and taking pictures. I ignored them and kept working. The snow was heavy, wet, and every shovelful felt like it weighed 50 pounds. My shoulders were burning, my hands were blistered, and I was sweating despite the freezing temperature. Patricia and Linda stood there for another 10 minutes, documenting everything, before finally leaving. I watched them drive away and felt a deep sense of dread. I knew, somehow I just knew, that no matter how much I got done, it wouldn't be enough for her. I worked until the sun started setting around 5:30. I'd cleared maybe 85% of the roof. There was still a strip along the peak that I couldn't reach safely without better equipment, but the bulk of the weight was gone. My gutters were no longer straining and the structural danger was eliminated. I climbed down, exhausted, and went inside to collapse on my couch. My whole body ached. I heated up some soup, took a hot shower, and tried to forget about the entire ordeal. Saturday morning, I woke up to an envelope on my front door. It was a formal letter from the HOA. "Dear Mr. Sterling," it read. "Upon inspection conducted on February 14th, 2025, at 12:30 p.m. and subsequent follow-up at 6:15 p.m., it was determined that you failed to comply with HOA Bylaws Section 12. Paragraph 4 regarding snow removal from residential roofs. As of 6:00 p.m. on February 14th, approximately 15% of your roof remained covered in snow exceeding the allowed depth of 3 inches. As per the fine schedule outlined in Section 23, you are hereby assessed a penalty of $500 to be paid within 30 days. Failure to pay will result in additional fines and potential legal action. I read the letter 3 times, my disbelief growing with each pass. $500 for 15% of my roof still having snow on it, snow that posed no structural danger. Snow that would probably melt within a week anyway. I called Patricia immediately. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Patricia, I just got your letter." "Yes, I wanted to make sure it was delivered promptly," she said. $500. Are you serious? I spent 2 entire days clearing that roof. The only snow left is on the peak where it's dangerous to reach. The bylaws don't make exceptions for difficulty, Samuel. The requirement is 48 hours and you didn't meet it. I cleared 85% of it. The structural danger is gone. 15% is still a violation. However, if you feel this is unjust, you're welcome to appeal at the next HOA board meeting. That's scheduled for March 15th. That's a month away. The fine is due in 30 days, so you'll want to appeal before then. I suggest you prepare a formal statement explaining your position. The board will review it and make a determination. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling that unique combination of rage and helplessness that comes from dealing with bureaucratic nonsense. I spent the weekend researching Colorado HOA laws, reading through every forum post and legal advice site I could find. What I learned was depressing. HOAs in Colorado have significant power, and while there are laws protecting homeowners from truly egregious overreach, a fine for a legitimate bylaw violation, even an unreasonable one, was hard to fight without going through their internal appeals process first. Monday morning, I was back at work, trying to focus on debugging code while mentally composing my appeal letter. Around 10 a.m., Tom knocked on my door. "Hey, Samuel, did you hear?" he asked when I answered. "Hear what?" "Patricia's going around taking pictures of everyone's roofs. She's apparently on a crusade. The Hendersons got fined too, and so did the Kramers. Anyone who didn't get their roof completely clear is getting hit." I felt a small, guilty sense of relief that I wasn't the only target, immediately followed by anger that she was doing this to multiple people. "How much are their fines?" $500 each. "Same as yours, I'd bet. She's making a killing for the HOA." "This is insane," I said. "What's she even going to do with all that money?" Tom shrugged. "Who knows?" The HOA account is supposed to be for maintenance and improvements, but I've been to the budget meetings. Nothing ever seems to get done except for things Patricia personally wants. After Tom left, I did some digging. HOA financial records in Colorado are supposed to be available to homeowners. I sent a formal email to Patricia requesting the last 2 years of financial statements. Her response was terse. "Financial records are reviewed at the annual meeting in November. If you wish to see them before then, you'll need to submit a written request to the board with your reason for needing early access." I submitted the written request that same day, citing my right as a homeowner to review how my dues were being spent, especially in light of recent fines being issued. Wednesday, I got another envelope. This time, it was a notice that my request had been denied because routine financial curiosity does not constitute a valid reason for early document review. I was welcome to wait until November like everyone else. That's when I started getting angry, the productive kind of angry where you stop complaining and start planning. I reached out to the Hendersons and the Kramers, got their email addresses, and sent them information about Colorado HOA laws and homeowner rights. I suggested we coordinate our appeals. The response was disappointing. The Hendersons, a couple in their 60s, said they were just going to pay the fine because fighting it seemed like too much stress. The Kramers, who had 2 young kids, said the same thing. Nobody wanted to make waves. Nobody wanted to risk Patricia's wrath. But I did. I spent every evening that week working on my appeal. I documented everything with photos showing the before and after of my roof. I got a written statement from a structural engineer confirming that the remaining snow posed no danger. I cited Colorado laws about reasonable accommodation and proportionate penalties. I even found precedent from other HOA disputes where courts had ruled that fines must be reasonable and related to actual harm. The March 15th board meeting couldn't come fast enough. It was held at the community center at 7 p.m. I arrived at 6:45, dressed in business casual, carrying a folder with my appeal documents and a flash drive with my photos. The meeting room was set up like a small courtroom. Patricia sat at the center of a long table with 4 other board members. Linda, the secretary, a guy named Craig Burton who served as treasurer, a woman named Helen Davies who handled architectural review, and Michael Torres, who was the member at large. About 20 other residents were scattered in the audience chairs. I recognized most of them. The Hendersons were there, looking uncomfortable. Tom gave me a supportive nod. Patricia called the meeting to order with a practiced efficiency, running through standard business. Minutes from the last meeting, treasurer's report, upcoming maintenance issues. Finally, she reached the appeals portion. "We have one appeal this evening," Patricia said, looking directly at me. "Samuel Sterling is contesting his snow removal fine. Samuel, you have 5 minutes to present your case." I stood up, walked to the front, and connected my flash drive to the projector. My hands were steady, but my heart was racing. "Thank you for your time," I began. On February 14th, I was fined $500 for failing to completely clear my roof of snow within the required 48-hour window. I'd like to present evidence showing that this fine is unreasonable and disproportionate. I clicked through my photos showing the progression of my work, the massive initial snow accumulation, my cleared driveway, the partially cleared roof, the final state showing only the peak still covered. I spent approximately 14 hours over 2 days clearing this snow. I called every available snow removal company, all of which were booked for at least 3 days. The remaining snow, approximately 15% of the total roof area, was located on the steep peak, where access was dangerous. I obtained this statement from a licensed structural engineer confirming that the remaining snow posed no structural danger. I handed copies of the engineer's report to the board members. Patricia barely glanced at it. "Furthermore," I continued, "the $500 fine is grossly disproportionate to any actual harm. No damage occurred to my property or any neighboring property. The purpose of the bylaw is to prevent structural damage from snow load, which I successfully prevented. I'm requesting that this fine be waived or reduced to a nominal warning." I finished with 30 seconds to spare and returned to my seat. Patricia didn't even look up from her notes. "Thank you, Samuel. The board will now deliberate. Please wait outside." I stepped out into the hallway with the other residents. We stood around awkwardly for about 15 minutes before Patricia opened the door and called us back in. "The board has reviewed your appeal," Patricia said, her voice flat and professional. "While we acknowledge your efforts, the bylaws are clear and contain no provision for partial compliance. The fine stands. Additionally, We're adding a $50 processing fee for the appeal. You now owe $550, due by April 14th. I felt like I'd been punched. You're adding a fee for appealing. It's in the bylaws, Section 24, Paragraph 2. Appeal processing requires board time and resources. This is ridiculous, I said, my voice rising. I did everything reasonable to comply. You're punishing people for being victims of a massive snowstorm. Mr. Sterling, the board has made its decision. If you continue to disrupt this meeting, we'll add additional sanctions. Michael Torres, the member-at-large, cleared his throat. Patricia, maybe we should discuss this further. $500 does seem steep for what amounts to 15% coverage. Patricia turned to him with a look that could freeze nitrogen. The bylaws are the bylaws, Michael. We don't get to pick and choose when to enforce them based on feelings. I'm just saying maybe we should review if the fine structure is appropriate. That's not what we're here to decide tonight, Patricia said firmly. The bylaw was violated. The fine is applied. That's the end of it. I walked out of that meeting feeling defeated and angry in equal measure. Tom caught up with me in the parking lot. That was brutal, he said. For what it's worth, I think you made a good case. Fat lot of good it did, I muttered. Listen, a few of us are getting pretty fed up with Patricia's power trips. Maybe it's time we organized, tried to vote her out at the next election. When's that? November. Same time as the annual meeting. That's 8 months away, Tom. She could do a lot of damage in 8 months, he nodded grimly. Yeah, I know. I drove home, parked in my driveway, and sat there for a while just staring at my house. I'd been so excited to buy this place. Now it felt like a prison with a tyrant warden. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that $550. It wasn't that I couldn't afford it, though it certainly wasn't pocket change. It was the principle. It was the injustice of being punished for doing my absolute best in impossible circumstances. Around 2 a.m., I went outside to clear my head. The night was cold and clear, the sky full of stars. I walked around my property, and that's when I noticed something. My massive piles of snow, the ones I'd pulled off my roof, were still there. Huge mounds of the stuff, probably 8 or 9 feet tall in places, running along the side of my house. An idea started forming. A terrible, petty, probably stupid idea. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense in that vindictive 3 a.m. way that bad decisions often do. The bylaws said I had to remove snow from my roof. They specified the time frame. They specified the acceptable remaining depth. But nowhere, and I'd read these bylaws front to back multiple times now, did they say what I had to do with that snow once it was removed. They didn't specify where I could or couldn't put it. I went back inside and pulled up the HOA bylaws on my computer, searching for any mention of snow disposal. Nothing. There were rules about yard maintenance, about not leaving garbage out, about proper landscaping, but nothing about where snow could be placed once removed from a roof. Then I thought about the community center, about that parking lot, about Patricia's reserved space right by the front door, the one with the little sign that said, "Reserved for HOA President." About how she and her board cronies treated that lot like their personal property. The more I thought about it, the more I smiled. If they wanted to be pedantic about bylaws, if they wanted to fine me for 15% non-compliance, then I could be just as pedantic right back. Thursday morning, I called a snow removal company, not one of the small local ones, but a big commercial operation that handles parking lots and large properties. I explained what I needed. "Let me get this straight," the guy on the phone said. "You want us to load up all the snow from your property and dump it somewhere else?" "That's right. I'll pay whatever it costs." "Where do you want it dumped?" "We usually take it to designated snow disposal sites." No, I have a specific location. The HOA Community Center at 1847 Valley View Drive. I want it dumped in the parking lot. There was a pause. Is this your property? We can't dump snow on someone else's property without permission. The HOA owns the community center and I'm a homeowner in the HOA. I pay dues that maintain that property, so technically, I'm a partial owner. I don't know, man. That sounds like it could be a problem. Let me ask you this, I said. Is there any law against dumping snow in a parking lot? Not that I know of. I mean, snow ends up in parking lots all the time. We just usually don't put it there on purpose. And if someone complains, you can show them that you were hired by a property owner to relocate snow from their private property to a community-owned space. Another pause. How much snow are we talking about? Maybe 20 cubic yards. It's in big piles along my house. That'll take a couple of loads, gonna run you about $600. Perfect. I'd spend slightly more than my fine to make a point. When can you do it? I've got a crew free tomorrow afternoon around 2 p.m. Perfect. I'll be here. I spent the rest of Thursday and all of Friday morning feeling giddy with anticipation. This was stupid. This was petty. This was probably going to make things worse. I didn't care. Sometimes you have to stand up to a bully, even if it means getting a little dirty. The snow removal truck showed up at 2:15 p.m. Friday. It was a massive thing with a front-end loader attachment and a dump bed. The crew chief, a stocky guy named Derek, walked around my property assessing the job. Yeah, we can do this, he said. Might take 3 loads. You sure about this? I'm sure. Your funeral, buddy. They got to work. The front-end loader scooped up massive amounts of snow, dumping it into the truck bed. When it was full, they drove off toward the community center. I followed in my car, unable to resist watching this unfold. The community center parking lot was mostly empty on a Friday afternoon. Patricia's Lexus was there, naturally, along with 2 other cars I didn't recognize. The snow truck pulled into the lot, and Derek hopped out to survey the area. I pulled up next to him. Those 3 spaces there, I said, pointing to the reserved spots for the HOA board members. Start with those. Derek grinned. Oh, you're really committed to this, huh? Absolutely. He climbed back in the truck, positioned it over Patricia's parking space, and raised the dump bed. Tons of snow cascaded out, burying her Lexus almost completely. It was beautiful. The snow piled up around her car, over the hood, covering the windows. You could barely see the white paint under all that white snow. They went back for a second load and returned 20 minutes later. This time, they buried Linda's car, a silver Honda CR-V, and spread more snow across several other board member spaces. The third load was distributed across the general parking area, creating massive barriers and making most of the lot completely impassable. By the time they finished, the parking lot looked like it had been hit by a localized avalanche. Snow was piled 6 feet high in places. Cars were buried. The entrance to the building was accessible only by a narrow path. I paid Derek in cash, gave him an extra $100 as a tip, and thanked him profusely. Hey man, this is the most fun I've had on a job all year, he said, laughing. Good luck with whatever war you're fighting here. I drove home, parked in my garage, and waited. It took exactly 47 minutes. My doorbell rang with the aggressive intensity of someone leaning on it. I opened the door to find Patricia standing there, her face red, her body practically vibrating with rage. What the hell did you do? She shouted. I'm sorry, what are you referring to? I asked calmly. You know exactly what I'm referring to. My car is buried. The entire parking lot is buried. I had to wade through waist-deep snow to get to my car, and I can't even drive it. Oh, that's snow. Yeah, I had it removed from my property. The bylaws require roof snow removal, so I complied. They don't specify where the snow goes after removal, so I chose the community center parking lot. Her mouth opened and closed several times. You can't, you deliberately. I followed the bylaws, Patricia. Just like you're always insisting everyone do. The snow is removed from my roof and my property. Where I put it after that isn't covered by any HOA rule. This is vandalism. This is property destruction. Really? How is snow in a parking lot property destruction? It's frozen water. It'll melt. Nothing's damaged. My car is inaccessible. Then I guess you should have it cleared within 48 hours. To comply with reasonable snow removal expectations. She was speechless, literally opening and closing her mouth like a fish. Finally, she managed, "You're going to regret this. The board will bury you in fines." "For what? Show me the bylaw I violated." She stormed off without answering, and I closed my door, feeling more satisfied than I'd felt in months. The weekend was quiet, too quiet. I knew Patricia was planning something, but I didn't know what. I spent Saturday and Sunday working on my house, doing some interior painting I'd been putting off, and researching Colorado laws about HOA enforcement. Monday morning, I got an email from Patricia marked urgent. "Mr. Sterling, due to your recent actions creating a hazard at the community center, you are being fined $2,000 for malicious destruction of community property. Additionally, you are required to pay for professional snow removal from the parking lot at your expense, estimated at $800. Total amount due, $2,800 within 14 days. I read the email twice, then called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but one who specialized in HOA disputes. Her name was Jennifer Marsh, and she had a whole section of her website dedicated to fighting unreasonable HOA enforcement. "Mr. Sterling," she said after I explained the situation, "did you violate any specific bylaw when you dumped the snow in the parking lot?" "No. I've read the bylaws thoroughly. There's nothing about snow disposal location. And is the parking lot community property that you, as a homeowner, help maintain through your dues?" "Yes." "Then they don't have a leg to stand on. You can't be fined for doing something that isn't prohibited, and you can't be charged with destroying property that's partially yours and wasn't actually damaged. It's snow. It melts. So what should I do?" "Draft a response refusing to pay and citing lack of bylaw violation. I can review it for you if you'd like. If they continue to pursue this, they'd have to take you to court, where I'd be happy to represent you. But honestly, I don't think it'll get that far. Most HOAs back down when they realize they're on shaky legal ground." I paid her for an hour of consultation and drafted my response. It was professional, cited specific bylaws and Colorado HOA statutes, and politely but firmly refused to pay any fine for an action not prohibited by HOA rules. Patricia's response came within hours. It was less professional. "Mr. Sterling, your refusal to accept responsibility for your actions demonstrates a pattern of disregard for community standards. The board will be pursuing all legal options available, including placing a lien on your property for unpaid fines." That's when I decided to go nuclear. I'd been collecting information, documents, and records since this whole thing started. Now I organized it all into a comprehensive email and sent it to every single homeowner in the HOA. I got the email list from the community directory, which was technically available to all residents. The email detailed everything. My original fine for 15% roof coverage, the additional appeal fee, Patricia's refusal to allow early financial record review, and her attempt to fine me $2,800 for moving snow to community property. I attached photos, copies of all correspondence, and links to Colorado HOA laws showing homeowner rights. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My inbox flooded with replies. People shared their own Patricia horror stories. The woman who got fined because her mailbox was the wrong shade of black. The guy who was cited for parking his truck in his own driveway because it was commercial looking, even though it was just a regular F-150. The couple who were threatened with legal action because their garden gnome violated aesthetic guidelines. By Tuesday afternoon, there was a full-blown revolt brewing. Tom organized a special meeting, and by Wednesday evening, 43 homeowners showed up at the community center. Patricia was there with her board members, looking like she was facing a firing squad. The meeting was contentious. People aired grievances going back years. Patricia tried to maintain control, insisting everything she'd done was by the book, but the crowd wasn't having it. Michael Torres surprisingly broke ranks. Patricia, I've served on this board for 3 years, and I've watched you become increasingly aggressive with enforcement. These fines aren't about maintaining standards anymore. They're about control and revenue. How dare you, Patricia snapped. I've dedicated countless hours to this community. You've dedicated countless hours to making people miserable, someone shouted from the audience. The meeting devolved into chaos. Patricia tried to adjourn early, but the crowd wouldn't let her. Finally, Tom stood up and made a motion. I move that we hold an immediate vote of no confidence in the current board and schedule emergency elections for next month. The motion was seconded immediately. Patricia protested that it wasn't proper procedure, but Craig, the treasurer, pulled out his copy of the bylaws. Actually, Section 31 allows for emergency elections if 30% of homeowners petition for it. We've got 43 people here out of 120 homes. That's more than enough. The vote was unanimous among those present. Patricia was livid, but she was also outnumbered. Elections were scheduled for April 23rd. The next few weeks were tense. Patricia sent multiple threatening emails about liens and legal action. I responded to each one with increasingly detailed legal citations explaining why she had no grounds. Jennifer, my lawyer, sent an official letter on her firm's letterhead making it clear that any attempt to place a lien would result in immediate legal action. Meanwhile, I started campaigning. Not for myself. I didn't want the responsibility of being HOA president, but for reasonable candidates. Tom agreed to run. So did a woman named Rebecca Chen, an accountant who promised financial transparency. We created a platform, reasonable enforcement, proportionate fines, open financial records, and common sense over rigid rule application. Patricia didn't campaign. She seemed to believe her incumbency and authority would carry her through. She was wrong. The election on April 23rd had the highest turnout in the HOA's history. 97 homeowners showed up to vote. When the results were tallied, Patricia had received exactly 13 votes. Tom was elected president with 62 votes. Rebecca became treasurer. New board members who actually cared about the community, not just rules and power, filled the other positions. Patricia's concession was silent. She simply stood up, gathered her things, and walked out. I actually felt a moment of pity for her, watching her face as she realized she'd lost everything she'd spent years building. But then, I remembered that $550 fine for doing my best during a snowstorm, and the pity evaporated. Tom's first act as president was to review all outstanding fines from the past year. Mine was voided, along with the additional $2,800 charge. The Hendersons and Kramers got their money refunded. About 30 other unjust fines were reversed or reduced. But we weren't done. Rebecca, Going through the financial records that Patricia had guarded so jealously, discovered some interesting irregularities. Several $1,000s had been paid to a company called Patterson Property Services for various maintenance and consulting work. A little research revealed that Patterson Property Services was wholly owned by Patricia's husband, Robert. There were invoices for services that no one remembered being performed, consulting fees that seemed excessive, equipment rentals that couldn't be verified. In total, about $47,000 over 2 years had gone to her husband's company for questionable services. That's when we called the police. Not the HOA board, not anymore, but the actual Boulder Police Department. We filed a formal complaint for embezzlement and fraud. Detective Sarah Morrison took our case. She was thorough, professional, and clearly unimpressed by Patricia's attempts to claim everything was legitimate business. The problem, Mrs. Patterson, Detective Morrison said during the interview, I was told about later, is that you approved payments to a company you had a financial interest in without disclosure or competitive bidding. That's a conflict of interest at minimum and potentially fraud. Everything was approved by the board, Patricia insisted. A board you controlled, where you presented these invoices and everyone rubber stamped them without knowing you'd personally benefit. That's textbook embezzlement from a homeowners association. The investigation took 6 weeks. During that time, Patricia hired a lawyer who immediately advised her to return the money. She did, all $47,000, along with another $8,000 in what her lawyer called good faith additional restitution. In June, Patricia pleaded guilty to 1 count of theft from a homeowners association, a Class 6 felony in Colorado. Because she returned the money and had no prior criminal record, she received a deferred sentence, 5 years probation, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. Robert's company folded shortly after. Turns out when your only client was your wife's HOA and everyone knows you were part of an embezzlement scheme, business dries up pretty quickly. As for me, life returned to normal, or as normal as it gets. Tom was a great HOA president. He actually knocked on doors to ask people what they needed instead of driving around looking for violations. The bylaws were revised to be more reasonable, including a complete overhaul of the fine schedule. The snow removal requirement was changed to specify reasonable efforts, and added language about considering weather conditions and professional availability. I kept living in my house on Maple Ridge Court. The next winter, we got another big snowstorm, about 18 inches. I cleared my driveway, did what I could on my roof, and left some snow on the peak because it was dangerous to reach. Nobody fined me. Nobody even mentioned it. Tom did stop by to check if I needed help, which I appreciated. We'd become actual friends through the whole ordeal, bonding over shared frustration with bureaucratic nonsense. The community center parking lot became something of a legend in the neighborhood. Whenever someone complained about an unreasonable rule or fine, people would laugh and say, "Just pull a Sterling, dump some snow in their parking lot." I never had to do it again. The threat, the memory of it, was enough. People knew I was willing to push back, to find creative solutions, to stand up for what was right even when it was petty and ridiculous. Patricia moved away in August, sold her house and left Colorado entirely. I heard she went to Arizona, somewhere without snow or HOAs. I hoped she'd learned something from the experience, but I doubted it. Some people are just wired to seek control and power, and they'll keep doing it until someone stops them. The final piece of closure came in September, when I received a formal letter from the new HOA board. It was an apology, something I never expected. Dear Mr. Sterling, on behalf of the Pleasant Valley Estates Homeowners Association, we would like to formally apologize for the unjust treatment you received during the February 2025 snow event and subsequent appeals process. The previous administration's enforcement was excessive, unreasonable, and contrary to the spirit of community that our HOA should represent. We hope you will accept this apology and continue to be an engaged member of our neighborhood. It was signed by all 5 board members, including Tom and Rebecca. I hung it on my wall, right next to the original fine letter, a reminder of how bad things can get when petty tyrants get power and how satisfying it is when reasonable people fight back. Every time I look at those letters, I think about that Friday afternoon watching Derek's truck dump load after load of snow onto Patricia's precious parking spaces. I think about her face when she came to my door, red with rage and unable to articulate a single valid complaint because she knew I was right. Was it mature? No. Was it productive? Debatable? Was it satisfying? Absolutely. Sometimes in life, you have to stand up to bullies, even if it means being a little petty yourself. Sometimes the right thing to do is dump a truckload of snow exactly where it'll make the biggest statement. And sometimes, just sometimes, doing the petty thing leads to exposing bigger problems and creating real change. If I hadn't dumped that snow, if I hadn't made a scene and rallied people, Patricia would still be running that HOA like her personal fiefdom, still extracting money through questionable means, still making people's lives miserable over arbitrary rules. One stupid, petty act of snow-dumping revenge led to financial investigations, criminal charges, restitution, and a complete overhaul of how our community was governed. It led to real improvements in people's lives, to fair enforcement of reasonable rules, to financial transparency and accountability. So yeah, I dumped snow on the HOA parking lot because they fined me for not clearing my roof fast enough. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Living in Pleasant Valley Estates now is actually pleasant. We have community barbecues where Tom grills burgers and people actually talk to each other instead of reporting each other for fence height violations. Kids play in yards with fun decorations instead of HOA-approved beige conformity. People park their trucks, put up their garden gnomes, and paint their mailboxes whatever color they want within reason. The monthly dues actually go to community improvements now. We fixed the playground, repaved some streets, and installed better lighting. Rebecca publishes detailed financial reports every quarter, and anyone can request documentation whenever they want. Transparency, it turns out, keeps everyone honest. I still work from home, and Patricia isn't around anymore to give me suspicious looks about it. My roof is fine. My house is fine. And every time it snows, I smile a little bit, remembering the day I turned the tables on a petty tyrant with the pettiest, most satisfying revenge I've ever committed. The whole experience taught me something important about communities and power. HOAs aren't inherently bad. They can serve legitimate purposes, maintaining common areas, handling shared expenses, and yes, even enforcing reasonable standards that preserve property values. But they're only as good as the people running them, and when bad people get power, even a little power over something as mundane as snow removal deadlines, they can make everyone's lives miserable. It also taught me that standing up to that kind of petty tyranny matters. Not just for yourself, but for everyone else being quietly oppressed by unreasonable rules and disproportionate punishments. How many people had Patricia fined over the years for minor violations? How much money had she extracted through her husband's company? How much stress and unhappiness had she caused by treating the neighborhood like her personal kingdom? If I'd just paid that initial $500 fine, if I'd been like the Hendersons and the Kramers and decided it wasn't worth the fight, none of that would have been exposed. Patricia would still be in power. The financial irregularities would have continued. The excessive fines would have kept rolling in. But I didn't just pay it. I got angry, I got creative, and I dumped a truckload of snow on her parking space. And that one act of petty defiance started a chain reaction that changed everything. Sometimes the little rebellions matter. Sometimes standing up for yourself over something as stupid as a snow removal fine leads to real justice. Sometimes you have to be willing to look a little ridiculous, to be a little petty, to fight over something that seems too small to matter, because it's not really about the snow or the fine or the parking space. It's about principle. It's about refusing to accept injustice, even minor injustice, even when it would be easier to just go along. I'm glad I fought. I'm glad I dumped that snow. I'm glad I exposed Patricia's corruption and helped create real change in my community. And I'm especially glad I don't have to worry about getting fined for garden gnomes, because I'm definitely getting a garden gnome next spring. A big one. Maybe a whole collection of them. Let's see someone try to find me for that now.